hits for the bench. Extra attacker coming on to even things up. To the net, Albertson scores!
The Extra Attackers Podcast with Maude and Jordan.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Extra Attackers Podcast. A little bit of an impromptu episode here today because we got some big summer news in the NHL of Auston Matthews signing a 4-year contract extension. So with our Senators gear all over the cameras, we will be very unbiased here talking about the Leafs today. What did you think about the contract, Jordan?
I actually had a lot of thoughts. It's hard because I want to step beyond the Sens bias, which is really hard to do. But I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going on with this contract, and there's lots of talking points. So I'm not surprised that it kind of like went sort of viral on Twitter the second it was announced. I'm not surprised that there's so much discussion about it, to be honest.
Yeah, it was just a huge dead zone in the middle of August. Like, since Tarasenko signed with the Sens, I don't really feel like there was much in between that and this signing here today. So everyone was desperate for some news. And even though I think I was kind of secretly hoping for Matthews to leave the Leafs in UFA, I'll take it for the news, and gives us something to talk about. And hey, even though he signed, it's only a 4-year deal, so he'll still be hitting UFA at a fairly young age.
Yeah, it gives him another opportunity to get a big paycheck. And that way his agent is kind of a genius in how he structured his contracts, because it's been a contract every 4 or 5 years, which means that Matthews is going to have big payouts at each of his big contract points. So he's absolutely getting the bag. And I want to start off kind of positive in the sense that I don't want to ever discourage players from getting the bag. Like, this is your job. You commit your livelihood to it. You work years to get here. You retire like in your late 30s often. It's not something you do forever. So having that security for your lifetime, I think it's very valid. And I don't necessarily agree with chopping down players for trying to get the most money. In certain situations, I think this one is interesting. And there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of factors that go into this. I guess just to start off, it is a lot of money. It is money for the best player in the league, ostensibly, because it's the top paid player. Obviously, when McDavid's contract comes up, that will probably change. But it's $13 million for Auston Matthews for 4 years. In my opinion, if you were giving Auston Matthews $13 million, you're getting 8 years, bare minimum. You should be getting 8 years. The fact that he doesn't have full term, I find kind of astounding. Now, on the other hand of that, I do recognize that by that time the contract is done, if the Leafs have done nothing in the 4 years, like in the next 4 years after that contract is signed, they're probably gearing up for a rebuild anyways. There's probably not under a lot of pressure to get Matthews back for even more. Like, there's more avenues to work within that when that contract comes. But I'm still so surprised that they did another short-term deal, and they did it now. Like, if you're the Leafs, I'm thinking that if you hear Matthews say, I want 4 years, I'm not budging, it's like, okay, we're not going to sign you now. We'll wait. Like, we have time. We have no reason not to sign you. Obviously, injuries and stuff can impact that. But theoretically, if Matthews has another down year, that price could go down even more. So I kind of don't really know why the Leafs caved. And that's kind of been the consistent thing with the contracts with the Leafs. They continuously cave to every player that they have.
Yeah, like you said about the 4-year term, it's sort of the same thing that happened with his last contract, where when it was announced, I saw the cap hit and I'm like, oh, if that's for 8 years, that's pretty damn good. And then it wasn't. It was only for like 5 years or so. So then the same scenario again, where it feels like the team compromised in terms of term, just to be able to keep this player. It seems like sort of a situation where he's got these really high demands, and he's right to have those demands. He's top 5 player in the world, but the team's ability to negotiate here, once again, even though it's a different GM, it's not Dubas anymore, and everyone was always all over Dubas for his contract negotiations with his RFAs, but then the new GM, Treliving, comes in, and it's still basically like part 2 with the Matthews contract. It's just a very big cap hit. Now it's the biggest cap hit in the whole NHL and they still didn't get max term once again. Like, it's just, I get that you have to just keep these players no matter what. Like, you couldn't risk Matthews walking, so you had to just get him signed. But so really, if you're a Leafs fan, you can't complain. But it's in terms of the broader scope of the league, I don't think it's a great contract, and I think other superstars are going to be looking at this contract and then saying they want to get paid. Like, the agents of those other players are going to be excited. They're going to be rubbing their hands together saying, oh, look, we can just copy the Matthews contract. That's going to be our demand, like a shorter term with a higher cap hit. We'll get into this a little bit later, but there's quite a few star players with new contracts being needed in the next year or two, and I'm very curious to see how some of those turn out.
Me too, honestly. But I want to make a quick note on that point. Something I found really interesting. So I kind of thought similarly with the last Matthews contract. When he gets 10 mil for 5 years, I'm thinking, this is the new way for star players to get paid. They're going to take shorter term deals for more money so that they get paid more over the course of their career, because there's more instances where they get new contracts. They update it to what the league cap hit is, what the revenue is. But the interesting thing is, after that contract happens with Matthews, we essentially haven't seen the same thing. And actually, Drew Livingstone made a tweet that I found really interesting, where he says that the only two players in the league that have contracts that are over 10 million that are less than 7 years are Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner.
Of course.
And it's only happened 3 times because 2 times it was Matthews. So it's really weird. Like, you would think, this is where the league is going to go, but why isn't it happening elsewhere? And like, I could see this being the paradigm shift that like kind of pushes it. But at the same time, I'm thinking about contracts like Jack Hughes, Stützle. They got paid for 8 years, $8 million term. And obviously this was when they were more unproven than Matthews was or Marner was. But they still took long-term contracts, knowing that they had to risk their potential to stay with the teams that they were happy with. And when you look at it, Stützle is starting his extension this year. Last year, he had more points than Auston Matthews. He had a higher points per game. He had 1 less goal than Auston Matthews did last year. And I recognize that Auston Matthews, it was pretty much confirmed that he was dealing with injuries the entire season. So this was obviously a down year. Hopefully it doesn't get replicated. Hopefully he's healthy next year. But I still find it crazy that after a down year like that, after we've seen what's happened with the previous contracts with the Leafs, that they still caved. They didn't try anything to make the situation any different. They were just like, okay, you want this money? We obviously need to sign you. Go have it all. And this, I'm not criticizing Matthews for that, but I'm criticizing the team for not playing around with it a bit more. It just seems strange to me.
You mentioned Jack Hughes, and I forgot that he was signed to flat $8 million. That is, like, we always rave as Sens fans about the Stützle contract, but oh my god, the Jack Hughes contract, that's ridiculous.
It's impressive.
Like,
yeah.
On one hand, you can't compare that contract to the current Matthews contract, but you can definitely compare it to the previous Matthews contract, and especially since that other Matthews contract was signed like 5 years ago, right? So that's not looking good in terms of what Dubas signed him for originally. And yeah, in terms of Matthews having a down year, you're basically paying him this money in hopes that he scores 50 goals every year. Like, 74 games, 85 points this year. I mean, that's a down year for him. But if he stays around that level, it's probably a little bit below what you would expect for this cap hit. But if he goes back up at all in terms of production, I think he will be worth it. But like you said, in terms of a team building perspective, it feels like you just cave to give him what he wants, and then what do you do? And then Nylander and Marner see that this happened again, that Matthew just got what he wants, and then they're going to say, give me what I want.
Yeah, I find it so weird that you cave and give Matthews this sort of contract when you still have Marner and Nylander coming up soon, and they're just going to go out and ask for the exact same thing. They're going to go ask for the bag as much as possible. And like, again, I don't like to criticize players for going to get the bag. But if you're a team, why aren't you fighting a little bit harder to get that price down so that when someone like Marner or Nylander comes up, they can't just point to the player right next to them as a comparable? because they just go, oh, Austin's making 13 million. And someone like Marner can be like, I get more points than him. I'm arguably just as good. I'm just a winger. That's the only difference. Why am I not making like 12 mil on my next contract? And the team can't really say anything because they're just like, yeah, we gave that up. Here's your 12 mil contract for 5 years. It's just really weird to me that they didn't fight for anything here again. And it's frustrating. I think it's frustrating for some Leaf fans to see this happen again. And they're just kind of like, why can't we ever be like, that was a good contract for a high end player? That's like a perfect medium. It's always like give and take, it seems. And of course, there's the whole thing about a team that has a player over 10 million hasn't won a cup yet. Certainly, I think that trend's going to break sooner rather than later. But it shows that it really hampers your team's ability to build around those number one players. And even with the cap going up, like next year, essentially, you gave all that money to Matthews. So if you want to retain players like Bertuzzi, Domi, it's going to be even harder because you even have less room to work. And that's not even mentioning a player like Samsonov. If Samsonov goes and has a really good season, he's going to want 5 mil, 6 mil in the new cap market. And then do you just say, well, we can't do that, so we got to fall back on Wall and just hope that he's good? Like, I don't think it's an awful contract. I think he's worth the money, but I think it's hard to watch the Leafs essentially have zero fight again, and that result in this huge payday, and think confidently that like, oh yeah, they'll do well with Marner and Nylander, and oh yeah, they'll definitely be able to build around him. Those are probably my biggest concerns if I was a Leafs fan.
Yeah, in terms of the players making $10 million winning the cup, I believe Jack Eichel would be the first one this season then, because
I thought so.
He's got the exact 10 million cap hit. But I did want to say, how funny would it have been if the first player to win the cup with $10 million salary was Bobrovsky? It almost happened. And then like the most unexpected out of anyone who makes that much salary, if it was him as the first one, I think that would have been hilarious. And then you would have had some Leafs fans being like, oh, see, it's doable. You can win with $10 million players, as if like you can compare a fluke run from Bobrovsky to how the Leafs team is built. But yeah, you also mentioned in terms of retaining players on the rest of the roster, like Bertuzzi and Domi, they're clearly in Toronto on these 1 year show me deals where other teams are going to be looking at them and seeing if they have good years playing top roles in Toronto. Like Bertuzzi might be on Matthews' wing, for crying out loud. He'll probably put up over 60 points. And then how are the Leafs going to be able to afford to re-sign either of these guys if they do have good years? If they have kind of modest years, maybe then you can keep them at a lower cap hit than what they expected. But these are guys who are clearly trying to cash in. And I really don't know how you just get any sort of reliable depth with the way that this team is built. Like, they don't really have any of those steal contracts where it's like, wow, we have this guy locked in for this many years at this number and the cap's going to go up. They don't really have any contracts like that.
No, like the closest one I could think of is maybe Morgan Riley, but
Yeah.
even him, like he brings a lot of offense and he's pretty bad defensively. I know had a really good playoff, but again, he's not like a great two-way defenseman. You're basically just paying him for the offense. So I don't think in that way it's really like a great value contract. I think it's about just right. It's what he deserves. But you're absolutely right. I struggle to think of any players on the Leafs where it's like, yep, that's a great contract. You have great value there, rather than either that's like right on the edge. That's perfect. That's where it should be. Or you paid them too much. Players like Camp, Ryan Reeves in relation to term, stuff like that happens. And again, going back to like building around the team, I think about Ottawa and how it's been kind of public that Dorian has pushed back against giving other players the cap above Stützle, because it's like, okay, that's our ceiling. That's our best player. Anyone else should be making less than that. Obviously, if you happen to get really lucky and you get a really good player, you might have to pay them more. But it's a great way to be like, okay, should you be making this because our best player is only making this, whereas you don't have that anymore in Toronto. Your best player is making like the most in the NHL, and you're just going to point to that and be like, my salary should be higher. So it's not something I hate. It's just something where it's like I see a lot of worry in it, and if it doesn't go well, if it doesn't work out, it's going to be looked back upon as just an unfortunate move.
Yeah, like we've already seen that Mitch Marner thinks he is as good as Auston Matthews in terms of contract negotiations, and you could argue in terms of production that he is as valuable. It's the whole goals versus assists thing, but Marner still scores a good amount of goals for a playmaker. So it's not like the sort of the what Dorian is doing in Ottawa and saying Stützle is our best player. I can't justify playing, say, Alex DeBrincat more than Stützle, but you know Marner is just going to show up and be like, yeah, I'm as good as Matthews, so I would like a matching contract, please. And with the way that they just give Matthews what he wants, are they gonna play hardball with Marner? I really don't know. And even before they get to needing to do that, they still need to re-sign Nylander. He's still on an expiring deal, making $7 million right now. And you mentioned earlier that say the cap goes up for about like $2 million next season, they would hope for more, but I mean, it always goes up less than we expect. Those that little amount that it goes up is already going right into Matthews' contract. So if you're gonna give Nylander a raise, and he's probably got to be making at least 8.5 or 9 million, how is that gonna fit? And then you have to give Marner the raise a year after that.
Exactly. And like if you had signed Matthews to an 8-year term, you could at least in like 5 years be like, okay, comparable to how much the cap has gone up, that's a pretty good cap percentage contract. It's not taking up as much as your cap as it was before. But since it's so short term, he's going to be able to renegotiate that. He's going to go right back up to the same percentage immediately. And like we should have better cap growth because obviously COVID messed everything up. But even still, Matthews has that window to renegotiate and get back up to that upper echelon of cap percentage players because of the shortness of this deal, which I think is not a great decision. If you're going to give him this much money, I would at least want to lock him up long term to be like, okay, in the future, this is going to look better and better instead of, okay, this is going to look maybe good if he ups his production in year 3 and 4. And then you're right back at square one. And again, that doesn't even consider what Marner, what Nylander are going to ask for after seeing this inflated cap hit. So it's kind of a messy situation. But even then, it's really hard to blame the Leafs for like saying, no, you shouldn't sign your star player. It's really hard to say that, but it's hard to ignore all the external factors that make this complicated.
I will say the one thing that could work out for the Leafs with the way things are lined up right now is that Tavares' deal expires at the exact same time as Marner's deal. So at that point, Tavares will be 34. His production, he's still a very good player. I think his production will probably like stay about the same for the next couple of years. But by the time he's 34 and looking for the new contract, I don't think he will like. He's the type of guy that I would expect more than anyone else on the Leafs to actually take a hometown discount because we all know about the pajamas picture. He just
boy.
he was just waiting to be able to play for the Leafs, and it's they're still going to be a good team in 2 years. So I'm sure he's going to sign like somewhere between like 6 to 8 mil on his next contract. But the thing is, with his age, right? Maybe he starts getting injuries, or maybe his production goes down, and then maybe you'll need a new second line center at that point. Soon after extending him, maybe. So the one good thing is if Tavares does take a hometown discount, that will give you room to give Marner a little bit of a raise right there. But that's about it. Like other than that, we were talking about the rest of their depth is all a bunch of guys on short-term deals. Other than Yarncroke and Camp being locked up for multiple years, which is a little bit silly, especially for Camp. And like. Yeah, just I'm looking at their cap friendly right now. It's just 1 year deals everywhere. So it is going to be a lot of like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic in terms of their depth and just trying to keep themselves afloat with bringing in random new guys for the depth.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny to hear that Yarncroke and Camp are like their longest tenured players, besides like the some of the core players, because it's like, oh yeah, those are definitely the players that you want on long term deals. Your bottom 6 players. Um, but I mean, we'll see what happens. I don't think this is a nightmare situation for the Leafs. I think it's a little bit too high, definitely too short. But at the same time, if Matthews ups his production, this could pay itself off. And he's obviously a really good player. If he can find a way to be a consistent performer in the playoffs instead of fading away, then it will turn into something that's respected. And I think people will look back on it fondly. So it's not a catastrophe. It's not even necessarily awful or bad. It's just concerning. And I think it's kind of disingenuous to ignore all the factors that go into what makes it concerning.
Yeah, I agree. And from there, I want to bring up some of the other superstars who are looking for new contracts in the next couple of years, who will be just elated at the result of this Matthews contract. So, first one is that Elias Pettersson has 1 year left on his deal, already making 7.3 million, and he put up 102 points last season. How do you think that will play out with the Canucks? Because has Matthews even, like, obviously Matthews scores the goals, but has he even had a 100-point season? Like, that's one thing that Pettersson has over him. Oh, okay, yeah, he was 60 goals, 106 points. So Matthews does have the 100-point season. But if Pettersson gets another one this year, or very close to it, like in the 90-point range, Pettersson might be one of the guys at the top of the league in terms of cap hit pretty soon.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good example actually. And Pettersson is interesting because I think a lot of it hinges on what happens with the Canucks in the near future. I've been very disappointed in the Canucks as of late. I find them to be pretty directionless, and they seem pretty content to be a middling team. And I think a lot of that is because of their owner. And I think a lot of fans would also agree it's because of their owner. I think he's become the new worst owner after Melnick passed away. So I think that is going to make it really interesting. Are you going to have to pay a little bit more for Pettersson to make him want to stay? Is he going to want to stay? If he does want to stay, what's a fair contract? I think if he gets another 100-point season, you would hopefully get something in the 8 times 11, 8 times 12 range. I think that would be fair for him because he's a really good player. And I think he's still young enough that it's hard to be like, oh yeah, you're one of the best players in the NHL. So I think that kind of saves the price a little bit. So I think 11 or 12 mil is somewhere where it will fall around. Like a 4 mil increase on his current contract isn't really too shabby.
Yeah, the term that he ends up signing for is going to be really interesting after seeing Matthews sign for the 4 years, because Pettersson will be an RFA at the age of 25. So he could do the 8 years or the 7 years, or he could also go the Matthews route, go for 4 or 5 years, and then he'll be a UFA at like 29 or 30, which is similar to what Matthews will be at the end of this next contract. So I'm very intrigued there if he decides to copy Matthews' strategy, or if he just says, I will commit to the Canucks. And I think you're right that it probably depends on how this season plays out for the Canucks, because we did our predictions and neither of us predicted them to be very good. If they're a tire fire again this season, I could easily see Pettersson as an RFA just saying like, no, I'm not signing long term. And they might be in a bit of a pickle there. But if the Canucks do have a good season and look like they're on the upswing, I wouldn't be surprised if they get him locked up long term at a cheaper cap hit than Matthews.
I think it would have to be cheaper. Just because Matthews obviously has more pedigree, and I think Pettersson, like I said, still needs to cement himself as a top tier player. But I do think that any contract that you give Pettersson, it's going to be worth it, unless you go like insane and give him like 15 mil. He's very good, obviously, and he's got to be a core piece for the Canucks going forward.
And then this next player is the really big one I wanted to talk about. Is not this season, but next. So about the same time that Marner will need a new contract, is Leon Draisaitl needs a new contract.
Oh.
So that's an interesting discussion of, do you think he should be paid more than Matthews or less?
I think Draisaitl is a better player overall. I think as a goal scorer and as a playmaker, he's the second best player in the NHL. That's my opinion, behind McDavid. Crazy that Edmonton has them both. So honestly, I think if he got paid more than Matthews, he would deserve it. Honestly, like it would be tough to scoff at if he got that. Obviously, it's funny because with every other team except Toronto, I always think about, well, what if the player likes it here and is kind of like, okay, I'll do like a $12 million contract or 13 million. Just like, by this point when Draisaitl's contract expires, he'll be worth more than that. I think absolutely. But it makes me wonder if he's going to be like, you know what, I want to keep this thing with McDavid going. I want to give this team some room to maneuver. Cap has gone up a little bit. I can ask for like 12, 13 million. It's not going to completely hamstring us. I wouldn't be surprised if Draisaitl takes that route. And I kind of hope he does because I think it's fun to watch him with McDavid, and that whole dynamic is makes such an incredible hockey on Edmonton. If they can sort the rest of their team out and have a consistent season, I see them going far. But yeah, I honestly think Draisaitl deserves more, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up making less.
So that's the interesting thing, is that McDavid's contract only lasts 1 year longer than Draisaitl at the moment. So you got to think they'll be talking to each other, and it's going to be like, hey, are you going to stay or do you want to get the hell out of Edmonton? And if I'm Leon Draisaitl, if McDavid is staying in Edmonton, I am too, because that's just the dynamic duo right there. And even though the Oilers have had trouble filling out the rest of the roster in the past and winning in the playoffs, like, you can't break that up, right? Like, it's basically the new Crosby and Malkin, just they haven't won a cup yet as early as those guys did in their careers. It's like, I can't see Draisaitl wanting to leave unless McDavid also wants to leave. At least the fact that Matthews is staying in Toronto, at least I hope we don't hear too much about McDavid to Toronto when his contract is going to be up, because that would be a freaking nightmare. But
Nightmare, yeah,
but
understatement.
yeah, I just because of that, like, their contracts being up around the same time, and I think if they both want to stay, I could see Draisaitl taking a bit of a team-friendly deal. I know he's already on one, so he might have sort of a mindset of, oh, I need to get even more money on this deal because I've been underpaid for a while, but I don't think players usually think about it that way. I think it's just like, they'll be happy to get the raise regardless. He can go up to like 12, 13 million anyway, and that's still a huge raise for him. So I think it's more likely than not that Draisaitl's next contract comes in like underneath the current Matthews contract, depending on term though, because could be a possibility that maybe McDavid and Draisaitl see what Matthews did with the short term, and they both just go short term. Like, say, we'll give it like 3 or 4 more years in Edmonton, and if it doesn't work out, then we're hitting UFA. That could be interesting as well.
It could be interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route. Mostly because then you got like one more big payday, and that's so much money. But at the same time, if McDavid or Draisaitl sign those short-term contracts, I would not be surprised if at least Draisaitl is still under Matthews. Like, if he signs like a 4-year, $12 million, $12.5 million deal, I wouldn't be surprised if that was kind of the makeup. Um, Getting less years, so they're like, okay, I'll earn a little bit less. But like you said, it's complicated because Draisaitl's already on a team friendly deal. Is he going to want to make up lost money, things like that? But I think those contracts are going to be really interesting because they're basically establishing the continuance of what Matthews has done. Is it going to be more of those types of contracts, or is it going to be players reestablishing themselves to their current teams, and then do players react to that development with the next contracts that come for the next set of superstars? It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's basically a question of, will Draisaitl demand to be the highest paid player at the time that he signs his deal to go ahead of Matthews, and then the next year when McDavid goes to sign a deal, he will have to be the highest paid player. So we're going to see the salaries start to rise. But yeah, I do think it is possible that Draisaitl does come in under Matthews. But then we know that McDavid pretty much has to be the highest paid player. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. But then, since Matthews signed short term in 4 years, maybe he'll become the highest paid player again. You know, if McDavid signs 8 years, Matthews might get his bag again and get that title back.
What's really funny to me is Matthews could sign, let's just say like he re-signs in Toronto after his next contract at 15 million. Just like, let's pretend. At that point, Stützle will be halfway through his $8 million contract. He'll have 3 or 4 more years left. And obviously, like, this is assuming Stützle either keeps his current point totals or surpasses them. But I don't think that's a hard guess to make based off the type of player he is. So it's just funny to me to see that comparison to someone that signed a very team-friendly deal and someone that was like, get me the bag.
Yep, it's we had to sneak in a little bit of Sens bias there too. Just a
Absolutely.
reminder that we will have one of the top 10 centers in the NHL signed for just over 8 million for another 8 freaking years. I'm very glad that we are not in the contract situations that the Leafs have had to deal with. That's the one thing that I like about Dorian's team building is just how he's handled the salaries for the top players so far. I think it's been very well done. Hopefully translates to some wins pretty soon. That's the one thing that we don't have yet, but maybe this season. But yeah, all in all, I think great contract for Auston Matthews as a person. Okay contract for the Leafs. Obviously, you couldn't lose him. It could have been better, but it also could have been worse. So pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of different things that make it kind of worrying, but at the same time, good job, Auston Matthews. You got paid, you deserved it. Toronto, you get to keep the best player that you've had in a long time on your team for another 4 or 5 years, I guess, because it begins after this season. So, you know what, you should be excited about that too. And you know what? Like, even though, like I said, lots of worries and concerns, it could go beautifully. Toronto could end up with like 2 cups in that tenure. Something I would never want to see. But if I'm being fair and removing some bias, it could happen. He is very good, and I don't think this down year is necessarily indicative of the production he's going to have over the rest of his career.
That's another thing that I forgot to mention is that the Leafs Cup window shifts a little bit to now when Matthews' next contract ends, because if they flop at any point during these next 5 years and end up missing the playoffs at any point, and maybe you have to try to rebuild, then he's gone, right? So the Leafs have to start winning here. They have to actually start winning some playoff rounds, because if it's just 5 more years of the same shit in Toronto, it could not end well.
Exactly, and a lot of this actually depends on Matthews. Is he actually going to show up consistently in the playoffs? Is he finally not going to go invisible in a round? And obviously that's happened to a lot of players. Marner, Tavares, Nylander, Nylander and Riley were their best players in this last postseason. And I think if that continues to be the case, they're going to have a lot of trouble. And honestly, I do kind of wonder. There's been so many consistent straight seasons where the Leafs have been very good in the regular season. Kind of wondering, are you inching towards where finally the magic stops a little bit and you have a little bit of a teeter and something happens and you just miss the playoffs or something crazy happens? Obviously, like that's a big hot take to think that's going to happen, but I do wonder, like, is it sort of getting near the cliff in that regard? Is something going to happen that takes away the perfect regular season Maple Leafs? And I guess we'll see.
Exactly. Like, I'm not going to predict it to happen, but that could easily happen over the next 4 years. Like, as we were saying, with there not being a lot of stability in terms of the depth of the roster, they're going to be moving pieces around a lot in terms of shuffling the defense and the bottom 6 forwards. So, and who knows what will even happen with Nylander? Maybe he walks or gets traded and has to be replaced. It's entirely possible that they end up just having a down year at some point, and then there could be fallout from that. Like, and who knows? Maybe if they fail more in the playoffs, maybe they sour on Sheldon Keefe, need to replace him as a coach, and then maybe the new coach, it doesn't work out too well, and then they have a bad year, and then who knows? It really is Toronto's time to get things done in the playoffs during this Auston Matthews window, because who knows what's going to happen after that if things end up going off the rails.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. This window is one last shot. Can you put it all together and finally do something? Honestly, you don't even need to win a cup, but make it to a conference final, a Stanley Cup final. Show that like you're able to push beyond the second round. And honestly, I barely consider that they pushed anywhere in the second round because they won 1 game. Just show that you can be a good playoff team. And I think that would be enough to extend that window maybe a couple of years longer. But that's what we're waiting to see.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting. And I think that's where we're going to leave it for today's episode. Nice to have some big news breaking in the summer to give us a good episode topic here. It's probably going to be pretty dry until preseason starts at this point, but I'm sure we will come up with plenty more episodes along the way before we really get into the craziness of the regular season.
Yeah, I'm excited for when the regular season starts, because before then it's a lot of like, what should we do on these off-season episodes? What is there to cover? So if anything, thank you, Auston Matthews, for giving us free episode fodder. We appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Like and share if you enjoyed this, and subscribe to Extra Attackers on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify as well. Again, thank you so much for watching.
Take care, guys.